was delighted personally to know that it was Tina Pisco that got the award. We've had a wonderful year with Tina as our first ever writer in residence in Cork City Libraries, and it was a difficult one. There were curveballs thrown from all sides, and we thought it would be in person, but it wasn't. But you know what? It worked out wonderful due to Tina and her adaptability and creativity and lots of legacy projects going forward as well. So thank you, Tina. So I'll hand over to Patrick Cotter now from the Most Literature Centre. Thank you.
Right, so I noticed a long time ago that when we brought in writers from outside of Cork to the city, they energised the literary life of the city. They augmented the literary environment, the local writers. And when I say local writers now, it doesn't sound right because a lot of the writers living locally have international reputations. But writers in Cork found that their own creativity was sparked and improved by engagement with these writers from abroad. So at a certain stage when I had the option to approach City Council and say let's establish a fellowship that would amount to a 3-month residency for a writer from outside Ireland, come and live in Cork, work with local writers, give meetings and get involved in cultural activities in Cork. That it was great the City Council was receptive. So we ran that scheme for about 5 years before the pandemic, and clearly during the pandemic we weren't able to bring writers from abroad, and I was actually glad that meant we could afford to give some money to practicing writers living with us here. So Lana Hopkins, the Frank Collins Fellow last year, and Tina Pisco was selected for this year. And I'm just going to read out a few facts about Tina here. So as you know, she was writer in residence with the City Library. She was the first ever writer in residence. And that's understandable because her writing career spans a wide range of genres and mediums. Published work includes best-selling novels, poetry collection of newspaper columns and short story collection, along with articles, comics, scripts, and even a cookbook. Along with writing, Tina has been actively involved in community arts. Over the years, she's worked with a large number of different groups, including schools, community arts centres, the travelling community, the asylum seekers, and bed provision, and many other groups. And one of the conditions of the fellowship was that the eligible candidates must have at least 2 works of fiction published. Tina, more than 2 works of fiction published. At least one of those must be a short story collection. And so for the 4 months that Tina will be the fellow, she's expected to work on her own creative projects, and she will be giving Zoom workshops for beginners in the writing of a short story. And she will also be meeting with individuals selected from the book clubs of the library to talk on 4 separate occasions about 4 separate short stories by Frank O'Connor. So please ask Tina to come. She's going to read one of the stories for us. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. There's a lot of truth out there. Due to COVID, it's perhaps a smaller grouping, than we would normally have. We would have had a bus up from Clonakilty as well. Small but perfectly formed. I just have a few quick words before reading you the story. I'd like to thank Pat Cotter, Tom McCarthy, and Cliona Ní for awarding me the Frank O'Connor Short Story Fellowship. Also thank the Munster Literature Centre that manages it, and also Cork City Council who generously fund the fellowship. Having this event here is really appropriate, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Cork City Libraries and Patricia Looney for their support in the last year. About a year ago, today. Cork City Libraries appointed me as their first writer in residence. And honestly, I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't had that opportunity to work on a series of new short stories. I just quickly thanked, because that's what you get to do when you're in my position, you get to thank people, which is great. I'd like to thank some really special people who've been friends and mentors throughout the last 25 years that I've been doing this gig. First and foremost, he's not here because he's in sunny Spain, Clem Carnes of Fish Publishing. Also, Maura Bradshaw, particularly, and more recently, Mary Morrissey. Their feedback, their mentorship, their support, their guidance has been just invaluable throughout the years. And then there's the kind of literary friends, you know, such people as Conal Crean or Mia Gallagher, Paul Casey, or Dave Lorden. It's kind of, there's this kind of rumor and gossip or feeling that writers are really backstabbing, nasty people to each other, but I have some really great friends who have been writers and have always been really generous and helpful with their feedback and with their time. Finally, most of all, most importantly, my friends and family. We got Anya and Keith here representing old friends. We got Cynthia representing new friends. We've got John and Chloe representing my family, my sister Alex and my 4 daughters, Chloe over there, Amelia, Sasha, and Francesca. They have been my constant and loyal support throughout their childhood, where I told them to go away because mommy's writing. I can really say that they never once said to me, Mom, I'll give it up, will you? You know? And when I'd say to them, do you know, I'm going to give this up, I just don't want to do this anymore, I'm going to give up, they'd say, don't be silly. Don't be silly, write a young adult novel and make some money, you know? They're the best cheerleaders and great first readers, and really good at pointing out where I'm kind of maybe being a bit boomerish sometimes, you know. They school me a lot. I've been a professional writer for over 30 years, and well, Pat didn't mention 30 years, he was nice. But yeah, I've written novels and stories and scripts and essays and columns and poetry and comics and internet drama and yeah, even a cookbook. I can't tell you what an honor it is to see my name linked to that master of the form, Frank O'Connor. Because of all of the things that I write, I really think that my favorite is the short story. And that's because it's difficult and it takes time and you can really be pernickety about it. And unfortunately, it doesn't really pay well anymore. I grew up, when I was a child, I was a voracious reader. I read a lot of books. I read a lot of short stories because when I was a kid, the magazines all had short stories. And I grew up reading, sometimes when I was really small, I mean, it was like I was hiding from my mother that I was reading the stories in Cosmopolitan or in McCall or Ladies' Home Journal or Red Book. I then discovered the New Yorker and the Atlantic, and even Gourmet magazine used to have a short story in it, you know. Reader's Digest, and yes, Playboy. Who I used to be that kid who, if I found a stack of Playboys, I'd be going, where's the short story? Because they were always really, really, really good. It's such an honor to be awarded this fellowship. I really don't think it's sunk in yet. I've been joking, Pat, that I think we need a ceremonial brooch or something to make it more real, because it's...
and a sash.
Yes, a sash. I'm sure you've all heard of imposter syndrome, and I've got it bad. You know, I don't know why they call it imposter syndrome. They should call it imposter voice, because it's a voice, and it's a voice that says, why are you writing these silly little stories when there are thousands of more meaningful tasks that you could be doing, like laundry, or more profitable tasks that you could be doing? So the thing that's great about having this fellowship, about the prestige and the time and the money and the space to be able to do the work that I do, is that when that little voice says, why are you writing those silly little stories? I can say, shut up. I'm a Frank O'Connor fellow, that's why I'm writing them. That's what I'm meant to be doing. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell that voice to shut up. I'm going to read the title story of my second collection, which at the moment, and I think it's probably going to continue being called that, is called The Dithering, Tales from the Peri-Apocalypse. To explain that, you know, sometimes when you're a lady of a certain age, you go to the doctor and they do a blood test and they say, no, it's not menopause, you're perimenopausal. That means it's not here yet, but it's definitely on the way. So these are tales from the peri-apocalypse. And I have to say that since I started writing these a year ago, it's getting more peri by the month. You know, literally it's a little spooky because I'd be doing research and thinking I want to do a story in a heat wave and boom, you know, there's a heat wave and a fire and floods. And it's just, yeah, it's getting a little bit too real. But look, let's face it, the climate crisis and the environment is the most important issue facing humanity today. And we're going to ignore it, and it's going to be at our peril. So let me take you to, oh yeah, most of the stories are set somewhere, but I'm trying to keep them vague so people can kind of decide where these stories are, you know, in their own world. But I can tell you a secret, and that's that this story takes place in Cork City, not very far from here. So let me take you to Cork City, where it's been raining for a long time. Clay, could you get me a glass of water?
Yeah.
Thank you. The Dithering. Rob stood in the lobby of his office building and looked out at the rain. I'm going to start that again. That's okay, close it down. Start that again. Rob stood in the lobby of his office building and looked out at the rain that was still lashing after months of downpour. If this was climate change, he wished someone would do something about it. He checked his watch. Not enough time for even a quick working late pint before catching the last bus home. Rob looked down at his feet and heaved an exasperated sigh. The wife had got him a pair of those novelty rainbow boots which were all the rage. These were bright green with raised googly eyes, which made it look as if he were wearing frogs on his feet. Rob stepped out of the building and into the current of water and people. The trick was to go with the flow to limit splashback. He kept his eyes down as he passed a line of miserable-looking people waiting at a food bank. He just plodded along, following his googly eyes' feet through the streams, trying to watch out for deeper puddles. A large group had gathered to say the rosary, blocking the entire pavement, clutching their beads and chanting prayers as if they were at a football match. Rob inched through the crowd, narrowly avoiding a naked man swinging a large wooden crucifix on a bit of string, shouting, "God is greatest, God is dreadful." As he approached the bus stop, a barrier narrowed pedestrians to a single file around a sinkhole that just yesterday had swallowed up a young man as he waited to cross the street. A big orange sign flashed, "All lines cancelled until further notice." Rob smiled. It was the best news he'd heard all day. He sent a quick text to the wife. Then he speed dialed a number that went straight to message finder. "I'm on my way," he said after the beep. Rob didn't like the term mistress. It sounded too much like S&M. Girlfriend didn't suit. A girlfriend was someone you brought home to your parents. Bit on the side was better than mistress. But he didn't like that much either. It sounded like a side order of garlic potatoes. The other woman was a bit clunky, but at least it was accurate. The phone rang in his hand. It was the wife. Rob turned it off. Sad piles of soggy sandbags lined every shop doorway. Traffic stood at a standstill, filling the air with the sound of idling engines and honking horns. Across the street, giant screens flashed a colorful mix of happy news and warnings to avoid puddles. He pulled out his phone again and switched it back on. It rang, making him jump. It was the wife. He watched it, taking the hump with each shrill ring. "Fuck you," he yelled as it rang out. "Fuck you, the buses have all been cancelled." Rob looked around, suddenly embarrassed. No one seemed to the least bit bothered by his outburst. Rob figured they'd seen worse. At least he still had his clothes on. By the time he got across town and up the hill, he was soaking wet. And his feet were killing him. He jabbed at the bell on flat 8A and waited, trying to stand out of the way of the waterfall pouring off the gutter. Down the hill, he could see the welcoming lights of the pub. Rob jabbed the bell one last time. Nothing. He hesitated for a moment before stepping back into the river running down the wide street below where the drains were overflowing. The phone rang. He answered it immediately. She must have been in the bath or something. "Where were you?" Rob asked, as he started sloshing back up the hill to the flat, wading against the current. "I'm home, of course. Where are you?" It was the wife. Rob turned and hurried back down the hill, as if the wife were watching him. "I can't talk now. I'll call you later." Rob stabbed his wet finger at the screen, desperately trying to kill the call. It seemed to do the trick. The phone pinged as he crossed the threshold into the dark warmth of the pub. The rain faded into a distant drumming as he closed the door behind him. The pub was empty, except for a rather attractive barmaid. She wore a tight red sequin dress, which showcased her ample cleavage, and seemed to be shuffling a deck of cards. She didn't look up as Rob squelched over to the nearest bar stool and asked for a pint of Guinness. The phone pinged again. "Are you going to answer that?" she asked, as she brought the lip of the glass to the tap and started the pour. Rob shrugged. "It's just the wife," he said, adding the saucy wink he reserved for the ladies. She really was very attractive, all blonde, wispy hair and pouty red lipstick. The barmaid winked back and set the glass down to settle. "You should check it. It could be important." Rob looked at his phone. A message from the wife. A picture. He waited for it to download as the barmaid set a snifter of brandy in front of him. "Looks like you might need this," she said, and winked again. The blurry pixels resolved themselves into a couple caught in a passionate embrace. Rob reached for the snifter and knocked back the brandy in one shot. A bolt of blessed heat ran down his throat, hit his stomach, and radiated out to his frozen limbs. The wife knew about the other woman. How could that be possible? Who had sent her that picture? The barmaid took the snifter and filled it again. Then she topped up the pint and set both in front of Rob. "Not bad news, I hope," she said, smiling. She had a lovely smile. Rob was about to compliment her when his phone rang. The barmaid picked up the deck and started shuffling the cards like a professional croupier. "Don't mind me," she said, cutting the cards with one hand, as she nodded at his phone. "Work away." The cards twirled and swirled. Rob was so mesmerized by the flow of cards that seemed to glide through the air like magic from right to left that he didn't notice that he'd answered the phone until a voice spoke in his ear, making him nearly fall off his stool. "I was in the bath. Was that you at the door? I thought you said you couldn't see me tonight." The barmaid was making the cards flip in a cartwheel before letting them settle back into a single pile in her right hand. She cut the deck and started over again. "I'm feeling rotten. I have a cold, and I'm 5 days late. I think I'm pregnant." Rob blinked twice. took a sip of the brandy, and finished the Guinness in one long swallow. Pregnant? What did she mean, pregnant? Rob, I'm never late. Get me a pregnancy test and some cold and flu medicine, the one with the vitamin C. And then she hung up. The barmaid flipped the cards in final flourish, gathered them up and sat back, breaking the spell. Same again, she said. The brandy's on the house. She didn't wait for an answer and started pouring the drinks. Rob stared at the barmaid's cleavage. It really was magnificent. He wanted to sink into those soft white globes and smother the panic he felt gathering momentum. Outside, the rain's drumming doubled and the wind howled, rattling the pub door. Sounds like you're in a bit of a pickle, my friend, said the barmaid as she set up the drinks in front of him. You can say that again, said Rob, lifting the brandy in a toast. Sounds like you're in a bit of a pickle, repeated the barmaid, laughing. The barmaid leaned in, and for a second, Rob thought that she was going to kiss him over the counter. He half closed his eyes and breathed in her perfume, hoping to feel the soft crush of her lips. Instead, she found the deck of cards and held them up. Pick a card. Any card. Rob chuckled, picked a card from the middle and gave it to her. She flipped it over and laid the card down on the counter between them. The 12th card, she said, shaking her head. Oh, your poor pet. You really are in a pickle. Rob looked at the card. On it, a man hung upside down, tied to a stake by his ankle. His hands were bound behind his back. His face was strangely serene despite his predicament. What does it mean? It's the hanged man. It means that you're most definitely in a pickle. There's nothing much you could do, she said, shaking her head. Even if you wanted to, she added, raising one eyebrow. Maybe I could just stay here with you, Rob said. The barmaid came around the bar and sat on the stool next to him. Rob felt a flush of pleasure as she took his hand and gave it a little pat. If you could have just one wish, what would it be? She asked. Rob started to speak, but she lifted a finger and stopped him. Look deep in your heart. What do you really want? Rob closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the ropes pulling at his leg. His bound hands felt them tighten as he struggled, loosen as he stopped, resisting. He saw the wife glaring at him. He saw the other woman pushing a pram. He shuddered as the cold rain drenched him. I wish I didn't have to decide what to do, he said with a sigh. The barmaid clapped her hands in glee. That's easy, she exclaimed. Finish up your drink now. Chop, chop, time to go. Go? Go where? Don't you worry your pretty little head about that, she answered as she walked to the door. It'll all make sense soon. The barmaid opened the door, letting little wavelets run into the pub and puddle around her red stilettos. She stood framed in the doorway. Behind her was a curtain of rain which blurred the street beyond. Come now, she said, pointing to his frog boots as if commanding them. Rob felt compelled to stand up. As he walked up to her, he was surprised to see how tall she was. Go, she said, pointing a long finger out the door. Go, and your wish will be granted. Rob stepped out into the rain. It was coming down so hard he could hardly see. The wind whipped around him, and he had to brace himself not to fall off the pavement and into the rushing traffic. He stood, looking around wildly, feeling his sopping clothes wrapping his body like a shroud. His hair was plastered to his scalp, dripping rivulets of cold water down his face. He was surprised to feel a strong grip on his shoulder. He turned to see the barmaid standing behind him. She seemed totally unfazed by the storm. Her hair was still perfectly coiffed, her makeup glowing. The red sequins sparkled in the raindrops, but did not get wet. Her long red fingernails gripped his shoulder like talons. His phone pinged, then it rang, and pinged again. Wait, she whispered in his ear. Her breath was warm and perfumed, heady and ancient. The phone pinged again and again, settling into a steady beat like a drum roll. The rain splashed the phone, making it wet and slippery. He could hardly hold on to it. Wait for it. He tried desperately not to drop his phone, which continued to ping, rising to a crescendo above the lashing rain and howling wind. Not much longer. Nearly there. Rob looked up and saw a big double-decker bus coming down the road. The talons tightened on his shoulder until the bus was nearly level. Now, said the barmaid, giving him a shove. Your wish is granted. Rob tried to regain his balance and flipped backwards, somersaulting into the air. His boots, jettisoned by the momentum, flew up, blurring into 1,000 googly eyes. The last thing he saw before the bus hit him, ending his dithering forever, was a plague of green frogs falling from the sky. Enjoy that. There's a bunch more.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
I really enjoyed the story.
Thanks.
And I particularly like the way you combined sort of supernatural with the mundane, and then you have the whole environmental chaos going on in the background. So you got three planes working at the same time. Did you find that easy to do? Because it worked. You pulled it off very well.
I think the way these work, these stories have been building themselves in a different manner to normally. Normally, I kind of know what the story's about and what's happening. In these, the first thing is that, I tend to decide the setting. So I knew it was raining, and I knew this guy had a mistress. The barmaid came as a bit of a surprise to me. I thought for a while that she was an actual real barmaid for a long time, but then I didn't know what to do with him, how to get rid of him. And it seemed like, oh, I know what I'm going to do to you, you bad, bad man, we'll shove you in front of a bus. But no, I wasn't conscious of that while I was writing it. But then you get the first draft, and then you look at it and you go, okay, there's these various bits, and they have to balance out, which often means chopping out stuff that was really, really great, but that just didn't, work with the pace of the story.